Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Carboor Farms Investor webinar. I'm Robin Holt, and I work from Jigsaw Agency, and I've had the pleasure of working with Ben from Carboor Farms on his capital raise. For the investor webinar today, we're going to go through a deep dive into the business, the backstory, the traction, the vision for the future, and then we're going to open up for Q&A at the end. So throughout this webinar, I'd really like to invite everybody to use the Q&A feature, ask your questions in there. You can upvote the ones that you'd like to be answered first. So please do go ahead and do that. And before we get stuck in, I'd just like to throw over to Ben quickly to introduce himself.
Hi all, I'm Ben Barrow. I am the co-founder of Carboor Farms. So we started the business back in 2015. And the objective at that stage was to really, for me to transition away from my career in construction and return to the land as it had been calling me. So we started, oh, sorry, Robbie, can you see that okay?
Perfectly.
So we started planting the farm at Carboor. So we put 10,000 trees in across 2015 and 2016. So there on the far left is, how it looked as it started, and it's developed across the page. In growing the farm, in developing Carboor, we realised that actually people don't really want nuts in shell. That's a commodity with the typical consumer to be an 80-year-old Italian man. Wonderful old people, but really the market doesn't want that product. So we then decided to build a cracking facility. So we were lucky enough in 2018 to secure the Food Source Victoria grant to develop the cracker. And in the very, very brief window between the 2019 bushfires and COVID lockdown, we were able to build and commission the cracker, build the shed. So my COVID project was actually to build a cracking facility. So you can see the colour sorter here in the background. That was a 2021 investment, which basically increased our capacity. So what we were doing in a month when we first started the business, we now do in an hour. So what's the market opportunity for hazelnuts, I hear you say? So hazelnut market, it's a high growth industry from a high base. So 2025, it's about $12.5 billion US dollars per year, expected to grow at 6.4% by 2030. So the Asia Pacific market is where all the growth is, although the largest market at the moment is the confectionery producers from Europe. So Ferrero alone, who will return to them a bit later, they use about 25% of the hazelnut production in their product. So how does Australia work compared to the global market? So at the moment, production is about 500 tonnes a year, and consumption is about 4,000 tonnes. So the Australian industry is not yet meeting the market requirements. So what we're wanting to do is really build on that, initially replace imports, and then look to expand domestic consumption. If we contrast the almond consumption, so almonds production is about 121,000 tonnes and consumption is 26. So even if we were to get to half the size of the almond consumption, we'd be 3 times what we are now in consumption, and multiple times, like many times in production. So if you take that, the global market and the domestic market, what does that really mean? So there's high quality requirement with low volume. So that's farmers markets, online sales through to independent gourmet stores. Here in the middle of the industry, there's the gourmet manufacturing and distributors. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a very low price but very high volume, is manufacturing. So that's all the confectionery producers and those other big organisations. So where we see the opportunities is in the middle of the chart. So in here with the gourmet manufacturing, the gourmet distributors, and probably some gourmet export. So that is automatic repeat sales. So once you're into a business, you've been through the onboarding process, it's repeat sales. It's a good volume. It's pallets per month, and it's a good sustainable margin. So that's where we see the sweet spot for our business. So here in the top left-hand corner, there's some amazing Australian producers like Hazelbray and Glendale and others around who are satisfying that cottage opportunity. We want to move into the mainstream. We want to take it from a cottage industry to a commercial industry. So how do we respond to that market opportunity? So we've established a business model that has 3 revenue streams. So the first being, retail. So where we have a very active online store, wholesale, and then industrial marketing as well. So when we first started the business, we were onboarding with an incredible distributor called Two Providors, who work for us in Sydney. And they said, we love your hazelnuts, but we just want to buy nuts from one company. Can you supply other products? Being typical entrepreneurs as we are, we said, yes, of course. So we went off to source the best quality walnuts, almonds, macadamias, pistachios, and other nuts. So that's why we can offer a very simple but high quality portfolio into retail and wholesale. The industrial supply, we are only focusing on hazelnuts. We have no competitive advantage with other nuts. But what a decent product mix means is that we're able to maximize yield out of a crop. So when we're cracking and sorting products that we would previously have to dispose of because they didn't meet the highest table nut quality, so broken or shriveled kernel, we're now finding opportunities for that by product development. So the raise, obviously, we're looking to use funds. So we're looking to develop company store. So really that's going to be around getting to market, getting much more branding out there, and really being a lot more reliable around the way we get product to customers. Belty Park Early Works, which is really, it's foundational for our provenance approach to marketing. And that's to really do the early works here. Council have, as part of the planning permit, require us to build a right turn lane into the farm, which is in excess of $500,000 investment. So depending on the raise, we can do the full development here at Belty Park, but we're just assuming it'll be the early works for it. So we'll get some of the activities activated here on site, but we certainly won't be able to have the full development. The third use will be a lot more sales and marketing. The middle market, the wholesale opportunities is where we really want to build. And then the scaling supply and product development. How do we get, for example, a lot more gelato base out is really going to be our focus. So why now? You might have seen in the news the Turkish hazelnut crop has failed dismally. Their production's down about 30%, and that's based on both drought and frost impact. So frost during the flowering meant that all the catkins were burnt. So they're the male flowers of the plants. So they weren't able to shed pollen. And then drought during nut set meant that the quality of the kernel inside the nuts was not good enough. So traders have sort of indicated that they're expecting a price reset. So this price reset to be permanent. So we're now fielding a lot of inquiries from local buyers who are seeking a lot more product. We need we have 13 tons to deliver before Christmas, which we've never had that situation before. Second trend is, responding to the change in retail. Consumers were forced to hibernate through COVID, so they started to buy online. So when consumers go to shops, they actually want to understand a lot more. So shopping is not around, or going to retail locations is not around buying stuff anymore. It is about understanding. It is about experience. So this is very much what we're wanting to respond to. Third item is the industry growth enabling work. So we've been, in both setting up the cracker, that is a key enabling infrastructure to the development of the industry. We're also working to import new genetics. So I have a letter of intent and import permit to get the new genetics in. So the new genetics are developed by Oregon State University. They're higher production than the ones that we have in Australia already. So that will satisfy a lot of the confectionery and manufacturing market. But what we are really pushing is the original genetics to be used for the domestic table nut market. And the third thing with industry growth enabling works is AgriFutures is funding a $2 million research project, which is looking at developing the hazelnut industry to be a levy-paying commercial industry. So we're working extensively from the Charles Sturt team and Melbourne University, who's doing a lot of research on that. So that is an amazing project which is being undertaken now. And the fourth why now is Belty Park. So that's a photo down our lane. We see a lot of opportunity. We're bounded by Grad Alpine Road and the Hume Freeway here in East Wangaratta. So we really want to get people to stop going to Macca's in Glenrowan and start to come in here to walk their dog, enjoy a walk through the orchard and charge their electric car. So one of the questions that was asked by a lot of people who submitted expressions of interest was, well, Ferrero failed, why are you guys going to succeed? And there are a lot of lessons to be learned from Ferrero walking away from their San Diego hazelnut farm. So we did some contract cracking for them. Their quality was fantastic. They used a variety called Giffoni, which is the main Italian variety that's used in their pastes, and it's the little nut in the center of rochers, their little golden balls of deliciousness. Their volume fell far short of the expectations of the European farms that they have in Georgia. And I think that was mainly impacted by site selection. So they're on the banks of the Murrumbidgee River. It's got great access to water. but it's sandy, hot, arid climate there in San Diego. So fantastic for olives and pistachios, but not really suitable for hazelnuts. Their price of production here in Australia is very high, so they're benchmarking against Turkish pricing. Australia just struggles to compete uh, with that pricing point. And then there were other Ferrero internal factors. So they had some capital constraints, which I understand was meaning that they couldn't buy the right equipment for the farm. They had corporate bureaucracy, and they were trying to manage an Australian farm to European standards. So there was limitations that were being imposed around sprays and management practices that we don't have. Um, so, I think it was incredibly disappointing that Ferrero made that decision to walk away, but at the same time, I understand from their perspective why they would do it. So yeah, that's a little bit about us, and I welcome any questions that you might have, Robbie.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was really good. And I think over the many weeks that we've been working on this, the most interesting part of the chat is talking about the industry, talking about what's going on a global scale, because it's changing a huge amount. And of course, with Turkey, so many currency changes, so much inflation, an awful lot is bound to be happening there for an industry that is really, really quite established. And a number of people actually did send through questions prior to this, which I'll go through now. But for anybody who's attending here, please do use the Q&A feature to ask your questions, and we'll go through them as best as we can and answer them in as much detail as possible. And one of the questions that I saw come through was really, asking about like a deep dive into the overall industry. You talk about Georgia, where Ferrero are growing, and they had that expectation that this farm was going to be, going to operate at the same level of scale. And of course, it didn't, but the quality was still there. For yourself, being still in a cottage industry, what point does it get to where you can potentially compete at a global scale with your price point? Like, where do you need to get to as a business, in terms
So
of scale of production?
look, I think that uh, I think that we would never be able to compete with the likes of Georgia and Turkey. So their labour rates are much cheaper, but at the same time, I think that we can compete. We just need to
Yeah,
be very selective of the niche that we're
yeah.
operating in an export market.
Mm, mm,
Um, so the 4,000 tonnes that are consumed, assuming a 40% crack out rate,
mm,
would be about 10,000 tonnes of production.
yeah,
That's how many thousand hectares? So that's probably 5 or 6,000 hectares
yeah.
to be planted just to meet Australian domestic demand.
Mm,
So what we see is, realistically, Australia would be producing 25 to 30,000 tonnes
yeah,
a year, which is a massive increase, a 50x increase compared to what we're producing now.
yeah.
And then we'd be in the position where we could start to compete. So
Sure.
that's why a lot of the material that we've sort of said is we are almonds 20 years ago, without the tax schemes that were driving a lot of the almond investment 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, no, understood. And we've had a question here around what the equity and cash flow modeling is that's available to study um, in this crowdsource funding offer, which will be launching next week. What will be available to everybody is an offer document, and in that offer document, what's supplied is P&L, balance sheet, cash flow statement, and changes in equity statement from the last financial year. So what you will be able to see in there are changes in equity. You'll be able to see information on a breakdown of the cap table as well, and then also a breakdown of the cash flow from last financial year. Ben, anything you want to add there?
No, that's all good.
Great. Um, and then another question coming through here. Why is Australian hazelnut supply so valuable right now? Could you tell me a little bit more about the market opportunity?
So um, it's actually really interesting. So the other major producers,
Mm,
especially the US, has a disease called Eastern filbert blight. So Eastern filbert blight went through and decimated many of the older variety farms. So the main varieties that are grown here in Australia, because of our biosecurity restrictions, we do not
yeah,
have the diseases that other producers have. So we
yeah,
still have, the industry is dominated by a variety called Barcelona, the best tasting hazelnut in the world.
yeah.
Um, Barcelona is an Oregon State University variety, so it's one of the American varieties, but it's susceptible to Eastern filbert blight, which we don't have. So um, the table nut market, which is the main focus of our business at the moment. So when you go and market nuts, there's different sizes and so on. So Barcelona produce a lot of the large ones, which are sized at 15 to 17 millimeters. So we're valuable because most of the newer varieties are actually tending towards delivering confectionery sized nuts, which are much smaller. So 11 to 13 and maxing out at 13 to 15 millimeters. So consumers actually don't want those smaller ones, which are for confectionery use. They want the larger ones, which have the better flavor profiles. Robbie, you're muted.
Sorry. And there's the market opportunity there. Is there education still to do for that market? There's certainly education on Australian grown product, no doubt. And you've probably been doing that for years and years and years, and you're still thinking, when's it going to happen? Ultimately, a lot of the time when it comes down to it, you will do the education for years and years and years, and your hard work will eventually start paying off at a certain tipping point.
Yes.
Where do you see that tipping point being?
Um, to be honest, I think the tipping point would be when you know when we can start to get some of these commercial scale farms on board.
Yeah.
I'm speaking to some institutions that are interested in putting hazelnuts in. So I think that once there's good news in out in society. So obviously the Ferrero departure was terrible for the industry. We need
Mm,
some good media coverage,
yeah.
and I think that there will be some big changes that come out of that. So um, when we first started the business and we had some customers at farmers markets and so on who came along and they'd buy roasted Barcelona hazelnuts, and we
Mm,
were away 1 month, and then they came back the following month and said, we made the silly mistake of buying the Coles product and trying to roast it ourselves, and like you've just
yeah.
ruined us.
Mm.
So I think that it's simply going to be a media saturation and a marketing effort that we're going to have to put in once the volumes justify doing that work.
Yeah, of course, of course. And it can always be quite damaging when a big player does fall. It takes a lot of the attention away from the smaller players, especially in a cottage industry, no doubt. But from the customers who you've had to date, some of the feedback that you've had from people who've been buying your product for years, has been pretty exceptional from what we've uncovered and understood from yourself and understood from the feedback from over the years. And really these individuals who, when they do come on board, the retention rate and the average cost per consumer, for those individuals who are staying with you and subscribing with you is quite incredible. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the numbers look like in terms of your retention rate from your e-commerce site?
Yeah, so the approach that we've always had is marketing will get your first sale and
Mm.
product quality will get your second. And
Yeah,
it's actually the real value is in the second,
yeah,
both product quality and service quality. So we've had a real focus as far as possible on making the second sale, making sure that people have the best product and best experience possible. So, we are sitting at around a 56%, I think it was, I saw yesterday,
yeah,
56% repeat customer rate.
yeah. Wow. Okay.
So, um, and then we have customers who have bought like month in, month out for the
Mm.
last 3 years.
Yeah,
So lifetime value, I think the average lifetime value is sitting at about $1,800,
yeah,
and based on an average sale value of $120. So
mm.
that says that an average consumer,
Yeah,
which is half above and half below, is sitting at about 15 orders,
yeah. Wow.
and
Yeah, great.
I think that that's like fantastic.
No, definitely. Um, and as far as things are concerned as well, we've got a question here about will you supply source and application of new funds raised? Um, as part of raising capital under this legislation, Carbour Farms is then required to provide every shareholder with an annual report. And in that annual report, there will be financial details in there. There will be a lot of updates on the the funds, how the funds have been spent, what the performances looks like in the company. I'm sure though Ben would probably look to provide at least quarterly updates to
Yep.
the shareholders, and so the shareholders would absolutely be getting more of an update. But just know that there is also a legal requirement to provide that annual report. And there's a number of requirements in that annual report of which the shareholders gain a lot of access to information on the company itself.
Yep.
Um, in addition to that, we've been asked the question which we always get asked is what's the exit plan or industry roll-up plan that's being considered as part of this. So thanks very much for that question, David. It always comes in eventually whenever we're looking at these opportunities. And of course, it's an important piece to think about. I think it's really important to just preface this though with saying that the funds raised in this round are obviously being used to go ahead and grow the business. An exit plan for a business which is still quite low volume, low scale, and is going to be trying to use these funds to scale up. Your immediate thought is we've got to try and grow. We've got to try and do what we can to be able to get ahead in the market, bring down the cost of production if we can, scale up the business, bring in as much revenue to self-sustain our growth as possible. But why don't you talk through some of the potential exit opportunities that you believe may be possible in the future, but knowing that for a lot of the shareholders coming in, we'd always advise you have to read the CSF risk warning and offer document before investing. But it's always important to consider investing funds that you don't need to immediately access, and pull out because it's not that kind of opportunity. It's obviously a longer term investment.
Yeah, so look, we've looked at various options for investors to exit, either by an ASX listing in the future.
Mm,
But I think realistically, what would happen is that we'd be an industry consolidation.
yeah.
So there are big players. There's a big Canadian fund, the Ontario Teachers Fund, that has bought a lot of nut industry players. So Starman Webster. So
Mm,
they produce most of the pecans and walnuts in Australia. They've recently bought them as well as some macadamias. So, in all likelihood, I think it would be purchased by someone, and then that event would allow the investors to exit. So,
yeah.
we're not certainly not offering ourselves, and we'd love to retain Australian ownership of Australian assets for
Yeah.
Australia's benefit. But we've got to make sure that you know, we can create exit opportunities for the investors, and B,
Mm.
we have enough capital to grow the business to the opportunity that we the maximum that we see we can do.
And to put it into a bit more context as well, um, can we go into detail on why some of those nut farms have been acquired and what you're doing as a business to put yourself in the position to be, very attractive to them at a higher valuation, at a sort of to be in a position where the acquisition makes a lot of sense for them, to be able
Yeah.
to say, okay, we're going to take that business because of the cost of production that they're at, because of the positioning, because of the land, because of the climate. I mean, there's so many considerations when it comes to nut farms and nut production.
So when we first started the business, obviously for my career in construction, when
Mm.
Maxine and I were talking about founding the business, we looked at various options of what business to come into, and we settled on hazelnuts because we saw it was going to be
Mm.
the most of opportunity to dominate an industry with the lowest cost. So by establishing the cracker, which is available for whole of industry use. So we both contract crack and purchase crops off smaller growers, off other growers. We've become a central hub for the industry. The driver of us going to license these new genetics, which is around getting productivity, um, you know, more productive, smaller trees with these export suitable nuts, was really how do we build supply chain to run this cracker? So the cracker, in its current configuration, can do 1,600 tonnes a year.
Yeah.
So in us going out and basically licensing the genetics which are going to really grow the industry, I
Mm.
think that we kind of have both ends. So what we need to do now is work with um, partners in the middle who will actually grow the product, and make sure that the industry growth is sustainable.
Yeah.
So by us selling trees to growers, the contract will essentially be a tree sale and offtake agreement. So
Yeah.
here you go, here's the trees, and by the way, to help your funding, we will take all of the nuts off you guys.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
going to it's going to stop any other player from coming in
Mm.
because they will need to go through the same steps that we have gone through in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think probably more so a question from myself around the climate, which you've spoken about quite a lot in our previous conversations, and why, you know, the positioning in that you're in Victoria is kind of perfect for it. Whenever speaking to any distillery, they talk so heavily about climate, they obsess over it. I know that this is a huge part of your life for the last 10
Yeah,
years is
yeah.
climate, what the conditions are looking like, and how the climate is. And can you talk a little bit about why the location that you're in has actually been pretty perfect, and why it's perfect conditions to grow these hazelnuts?
So hazelnuts, they so during the flowering season, the male flowers, so the catkins need chill hours. So they need between, depending on varieties, between 912 or 900 and 1,400 hours, chill hours,
Mm.
uh, to develop. So for the pollen shed. So that basically means that southern New South Wales and northern Victoria down to like northern Tasmania and so on are ideal hazelnut growing locations. So they've got relatively warm summers, they've got good wet winters,
Yeah.
and so on. So that's why Ferrero's like decision to put in Western New South Wales was a bit questionable,
Yeah.
because Stanley, Myrtleford, Wangaratta, Carboor, down to Tasmania are ideal locations,
Mm,
East
mm, mm.
Gippsland and so on.
Yeah, yeah, got it. And that kind of segues perfectly into a question that's been asked from an attendee here around what differentiates you from your competition.
Um, so essentially our market position. So our main competition here in Australia, they're focused on selling into the top left hand corner of that quadrant that we were looking at earlier, which is the small scale sales. So that's online sales and market sales and small store sales. So where we're going is we're aggregating crops. We're really the only aggregator of scale in Australia, and then we're going out to the larger market participants. So the two providors and those
Yeah,
guys through to Royal Nutco and the wholesalers who can get product out there. So I think that there's going to be a lot more mass market opportunity for us
sure.
than our direct competitors.
Yeah, great. Yeah, great. And want to try and get this question right, but somebody's asked, how can the industry scale up with no commercial nurseries producing commercial scale of hazelnut trees in Australia?
Well, that is a great question because we're solving that at the moment. So, by importing the new tree varieties, we're going to be onboarding a tissue culture nursery,
Mm,
and then that those trees will then be available to the marketplace once we've gone through getting the trees through quarantine and initiating them through the tissue culture. So that is one of the barriers that we've seen, and we're in the process of solving that as well.
yeah, great. Yeah, awesome. And what is the legacy plan? And this is just a question from an attendee. What's the legacy plan for Carbour? Carbour, should Ben or be no longer able to do some of the heavier labor of this operation? Who steps in? Is there a current permanent team, not seasonal, that's experienced and knowledgeable about the current and upcoming operations?
So that is one of the items that we're wanting to solve through this raise. So
Yeah,
through this scaling. So my old aching body can no longer do things that I was doing 10 years ago when we started the business. So what we're wanting to do is essentially scale it to the point where we can onboard a team. So the concern that I've had is having, there's no point hiring people if there's no valuable work for them to do.
sure.
The equipment is so efficient. We have seasonal workforce.
Mm,
What I'm wanting to do is now get people into, leading hand and quality assurance people into positions where they can essentially manage seasonal workforces as required.
mm,
So
mm.
that is all part of the growth plans that we'll be implementing through this funding.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as the use of funds as well, is concerned, can you talk through the breakdown of the use of funds and basically what you would be looking to do in the first 3 months, 6 months, and then to 12 months?
Um,
So really in order of priority. Everything's a
yeah,
priority, but which, yeah,
so the first 3 months that we see after the close of the raise is to really focus on the quick wins here at Belty Park. So
yeah,
that'll be some of the rewards that we're offering people are long lunches and various other things
yeah,
here at the farm.
yeah.
So this is the centerpiece of the provenance. So we really want to build this to the point where we can operate under the planning permit requirements and do various things, but obviously can't do the full development.
Mm, mm,
Um, we'll be building supply chain. So there's a lot more hazelnut crops I need to go and buy and crack and sell. There's more product development that we need to do. So
yeah,
um, the machines that we use to make the hazelnut gelato base, there are opportunities to make pistachio base as well. Now
yeah,
that like pistachio pappy and Dubai chocolate has taken over the world
yeah,
of pistachios, there is now an opportunity for some of the other niche products to
Yeah.
be satisfied. So there's an opportunity through product development for us to do that.
Mm.
What we're really wanting to do within the next 12 months, though, subject to suitable locations, is develop a retail store in Melbourne. So the offering of there's going to be a lot around branding and obviously infrastructure and so on from that, but also product development. So a product that sells in a retail store in Melbourne
Yeah.
of fast moving consumer goods is not necessarily the one that sells online. So there
Yeah.
is going to be a fair bit of work which we need to do around product development. So how do we hero hazelnuts in
Mm.
a consumer market which is going to be loved by teenagers, for example? So are we going to do a hazelnut milk bubble tea? What kind of opportunities are there to add value and really drive the brand forward? So
Mm. Mm.
there's going to be a huge amount of focus on that question. What do we sell? So I'll probably preempt a question that I assume you'll get about export.
Yeah.
Um, where the Australian market that we see is large. For example, online business to consumer sales is large packs of raw or moderately flavored nut products. Um, the Asian export market, which is where we see our future, selling into the affluent Singapore, Chinese, Hong Kong markets, and probably the Indian market as well, is smaller packs of highly flavored products.
Yeah.
So right now we're looking at export opportunities. If an export opportunity came along, we would definitely discuss with people. But at the same time, we're well aware that you need to have the right local knowledge, you need to have the right local palate to really succeed in those markets. So Maxine and I were in Singapore and Japan earlier in the year, saw how competitive the markets are, but also the flavour profiles and the offerings and so on, which are wanted in those markets. And while we see a lot of opportunities,
Mm.
it's just not for us right now.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And I mean, longer term, it's not just necessarily this capital raise, which is going to get you to where you want to go to as a
Yeah.
business. So even talk about like, and this is obviously theoretical, but in 5 years' time, if you've done this capital raise, another capital raise, when would that come into play? And also, what other opportunities do you think you would be taking advantage of?
Yeah. So look, what we see is we would probably need about 3 or 4 capital raises over the
Yeah.
next few years. So we've done a lot of consolidation since we started the business 10 years ago, and mainly it's been there's been a lot of bootstraps that we've pulled ourselves up with.
Yeah.
So what we now see is given the why now, the opportunities that are there, let's really drive it. So we'd probably see another raise in the next 18 to 24 months. But beside investment directly into Carboor farms, what we're wanting to identify is specific projects that would have more defined cash flows, more defined exit opportunities. So there might be the long-term opportunity with Carboor farms, which is going to give people opportunities into the other the opportunity to get into the other opportunities. So
Yeah.
to contrast, an almond. So if a grower was to go and buy land and develop infrastructure and do an almond orchard, for example. So we're assuming something similar in price uplift for hazelnuts. So land is somewhere around $12,000 a hectare. You go and do a
Yeah.
$25,000 development to grow almonds, and then you can
Yeah.
sell the almond development for $70,000 a hectare.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we would expect to start with these new genetics to start to go and do these developments to build the supply chain that we could then bundle together and say to, um, Starman Webster or something, hey guys, do you want to start buying these packages that will then offtake the product from? So, look, we're looking at a whole raft of opportunities. We're hoping that this will be a foundational opportunity for us to understand the capital raising process,
Sure.
and then we'll be able to go and replicate.
Yeah, great. No, fantastic. And we've got two more questions to get through, but if
Yep.
anybody has any final questions that they would really like to ask, please do drop them in the Q&A if we haven't already answered them. One of the questions, which was a follow-on, really from the point that you made around having a store, selling products, is whether or not all of these products you'll sell under the Carbour Farms brand, or whether or not you would look to create sub brands, and when you talk about these projects and investing into these different projects, um, I mean, it makes complete sense if some of them have a lot more global opportunity,
Yeah.
um, rather than Carbour Farms, which is the long-term sustainable business that's doing everything it can, and it means that you've got the provenance, that you've got the control of the supply chain. But then, of course, with some of the projects, you might have products which you then want to focus heavily on export markets for.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a completely different business. Would you create sub brands for those products, or entities that sit under Carbour Farms? What structure would you look to use for that?
Would we brand things not under Carb or Harvest? That is one discussion that we're having,
Yeah,
excuse me, at the moment. We probably would, because Carbour Harvest has kind of developed its, a very traditional,
yeah,
given that one of the drivers is very much provenance.
yeah,
So it's a very traditional, high quality, mm, you know, brown and green are the color themes. So it's a very
yeah,
traditional kind of product. So depending on the market opportunity, we'd probably look to brand something else
yeah,
to meet that specific opportunity, whether it's around colours or naming, or whatever. So, would some of those projects be under different entities? Yes, absolutely.
sure,
Um, so
sure.
so I think that, um, if people want to come along for the long term journey, 100%, I'd love people to join us through this
Mm,
raise and through subsequent ones. But I understand as well that people might have shorter term um, objectives as well.
yeah, yeah, of course, of course. And a great question to end on the questions, but we've been asked, what's the biggest risk that you see to your current hazelnut production, and how do you intend to tackle that risk?
The biggest risk I see is, oh man, where do I start? There's so many risks. Back in 2019, we were 20 minutes away from losing the farm for bushfires. So, everything that the Australian environment and climate can throw at us. Um, so, how we manage them is diversification. So,
Mhm.
a bushfire is not going to threaten every hazelnut farm in Victoria if they're spread all over the place. Choosing Beldy Park on the Hume Freeway, so we're right on the Hume, so we're adjacent to the main growing areas around Stanley and Myrtleford, and the growth opportunity areas which are around Shepparton, and then kind of midway between the two markets. So, um, you know, how do we manage risk? Oh man, like just diversify, manage things well,
Yeah.
and proper practices.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, I mean, it's an ironic question, really, because I think almost every day when you're building a business, you're constantly managing risks. Month in, month out, there's never a shortage of risks that could inevitably result in the business not doing what it's doing. But 10 years in, you've pushed through a lot of the hard yards. You've pushed through an awful lot of the early stage growing pains, literally. And of course, as a business, you've gotten to this position where now you can see the opportunities. And I
Mm,
think the global opportunity is super, super interesting for everybody who's looking at this, and no doubt growers outside of Turkey worldwide will be looking at what's happening there, and thinking, well, this industry is about to shake up in a big way. Um, who will be first to be able to take advantage of that? Who will be first to be able to step in and provide products elsewhere? And what happens most importantly to people who are buying here locally?
mm, yeah,
Because they are no, now facing a position where the cost of importing products is getting incredibly close to, if not it's surpassed, the cost of buying product locally. And if
yeah.
you buy product locally, then you get to sell the fact that it is Australian owned and grown. And that's gonna really benefit for the end consumer, who like you say, things definitely change. Some people have more sort of consumer driven behavior behind buying local, but it's definitely a huge factor here. Um,
And sorry, Robbie, just on that point, the I think the next area to watch for hazelnuts is going to be Chile. Uh, I led a delegation to Chile early last year, and just to see their industry, the way it's taken off. They've gone from 500 tons 20 years ago to 60,000 tons, on the
yeah.
way to 300,000 tons. So there are certainly people within my orbit that I'm sitting down and asking questions about, and how do you do this, and what genetics, what irrigation, what you know a whole stack of questions. Every question that you could possibly ask
Mm.
can be answered by someone within my orbit.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. And just wanted to thank everybody for attending here, asking all your detailed questions, providing, and Ben for providing, a huge depth of knowledge on the industry and the business. If anybody has any final questions, please do drop them in. But otherwise, I think I'll throw over to yourself, Ben, to make any closing statements, as we wrap this up.
Thanks, Robbie. So just to appeal to everybody. Let me know any questions, concerns, complaints that you might have. I'd love for you to join us on the next leg of our growth. It's been hard yards so far, but we are fully committed to building the business, making it a success, making it a great opportunity for Australian consumers and Australian growers.
Mm,
Um, my view has always been we need to make sure that our grandchildren have jobs, and we shouldn't be looking to import everything by exporting our jobs. So, you know, thanks everybody who's joined on the webinar, and everybody who's submitted expressions of interest. And I look forward to working with you and keeping you up to date and so on as we grow the business together.
yeah, fantastic. And for everybody who has expressed interest, of course, I have no doubt almost everybody who's on this webinar has expressed interest to invest. If you haven't, we will send you a link to be able to do so, because by expressing interest to invest, you'll gain early access to invest when the investment offer opens on Tuesday next week. We will send you an email the day before, letting you know the time, and giving you the link to be able to go and access that, where you can then read the offer document, read the risk warning, understand all the details about the business and the strategy behind how Ben and the team are going to be able to grow this business and take it to the next level with your investment. So Thank you very, very much, everybody. And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.